This presentation provides an overview of the review of the planning scheme that Surf Coast Shire is currently preparing. We have prepared draft recommendations which we want to test with the community during November and December this year. Surf Coast Shire is responsible for developing and maintaining the Surf Coast Planning Scheme. Under the Planning and Environment Act 1987, Council must review its scheme regularly. This slide shows what the planning scheme looks like online and provides you with the link to view it yourself. Council started the planning scheme review process earlier this year, undertaking background research and working with the councillors, planning staff and other officers, and referral authorities to identify opportunities for improvement to the planning scheme. Overall, the Surf Coast Shire planning scheme is performing well. The planning scheme is robust and planning processes are working well. There are opportunities for improvement, including a planning scheme amendment to fix up straightforward issues identified in the planning scheme review, a program of further strategic work to ensure that the planning scheme responds to contemporary settlement, housing, heritage and rural issues, and advocacy actions to take to the Victorian Government to address issues that are outside of Council's remit. We want to check with the community that we have identified all the issues and got the priorities right. This slide shows the highest priority issues that have been identified in the draft planning scheme review. Priorities 1 to 5 are all related to settlement issues. The other important issues are more discrete projects, some of which can be implemented quickly once the planning scheme review is complete. The Surf Coast Statement of Planning Policy, the Planning Scheme Review and the Urban Future Strategies are separate and distinct projects, but they are all interconnected. The Victorian Government Surf Coast Statement of Planning Policy, which came out of its Distinctive Areas and Landscape program, establishes the growth boundaries for Torquay and surrounding towns to the north. This piece of work sets the framework for Council's work on the Urban Future Strategy. These have been taken into consideration in the draft planning scheme review. The highest priority that has been identified is that Council plan for and improve resilience to climate change and other environmental risks. This priority needs to underpin all decision making. The second priority that has been identified is to finalise the Urban Future Strategy to determine how growth will be accommodated in the municipality. This strategy will set the framework for priorities 3, 4 and 5. Priority 3, subject to the outcomes of the Urban Future Strategy, is to undertake further strategic work in Winchelsea and Torquay, consistent with the Statement of Planning Policy. This work is necessary to ensure that any growth in these less bushfire-prone towns is managed in an orderly way. Priority 4 is reviewing and refining the planning controls for coastal townships from Anglesey to Lorne to ensure the right balance between preserving significant landscapes, preferred character outcomes, and managing bushfire risks. This review will take into account the changes to the policy settings for bushfire and native vegetation that have been made by the state government in the last decade, as well as the directions in the Urban Future Strategy. The fifth priority is undertaking infrastructure planning to respond to the planned growth, to ensure that infrastructure is in the right place at the right time to meet community needs, whether this be new infrastructure or improvements to existing infrastructure. This planning work is also important to ensure that the cost of infrastructure is fairly distributed between the beneficiaries of the infrastructure. Several other important projects have been identified. There are 2 new policies that have been recommended for introduction into the planning scheme. One is to encourage a minimum ESD or Environmentally Sustainable Development Standard for all new development. Another is to establish the minimum standard infrastructure requirements for new development, and that will align Surf Coast with other regional areas and keep the cost of development down. These 2 policies can be added to the planning scheme once the planning scheme review is finalised. The planning scheme review also supports Council's existing project to identify gaps and protect Aboriginal cultural heritage and historic heritage places, and it also supports the continued implementation of Council's affordable and key worker housing initiatives through the planning scheme and other mechanisms that are available to Council. In addition, there are 3 discrete projects looking at the application of specific planning controls in the rural areas. The 2 questions we have for the community about the planning scheme review are, have we missed anything important in the review? And have the next step priorities been correctly identified and prioritised? There are various ways to let us know your thoughts, including visiting one of the 3 drop-in sessions, completing a survey or writing a submission. There will be further opportunity for the community to have a say during the implementation phase of the planning scheme, including a planning scheme amendment and further strategic work that has been identified. Thank you very much for your time today.